Let's scaffold out the post to job page, and then we'll dive into the details within this, like the tags that we can assign to jobs when we create them. Then we'll jump over in a couple of parts time to create this within our GraphQL playground. And then finally, we will hook this up to the front end so we can just enter all of the information about a particular job and have that posted and redirected. So the first thing to do is just head over to our pages section here. Let's create a new folder here. We could call this jobs or listings, and let's create out a create.view page in here. Let's just build out the template really quickly, and let's just add create in there just so we know that's hooked up. So over in our header, let's go ahead and hook this up. So we've got add a job or post a job just here. Let's go ahead and make this a Nuxt link and fix that one up as well. And let's go and redirect this over to that new page. So that is jobs create. Great. Okay, so let's hit post a job, and sure enough, there is our page. Okay, this is going to be really similar to the login template. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this over and just paste this directly within here. Of course, I'm going to get rid of the entire script section. We're not going to need any of that information. But pretty much all of this is the same. The only thing that we need to do is have two sections here. So this login now becomes the listing details. So let's just check that out really quickly. And yeah, we get an error here just because we've got a couple of V models hooked up. Let's get rid of both of them. Okay, so let's make this a little bit bigger. So let's set this to 6 out of 12. Great. So these are going to be the listing details. Let's just start to fill these in. So I'm going to get rid of the password here. The first one, of course, is the job title. So let's hook this up and say job title. And let's also change the name over to job title here. Doesn't really matter too much because we're going to be hooking this up, and we'll get rid of the placeholder. So there's the job title. Let's go down and create the next one, and that is of course going to be the job location. So let's switch that over as well, and we'll change all of these over to job location. Next one is going to be the application URL. So job application URL, and we know that's just called job link, and it looks like that one didn't update, so let's change that one as well. Great. So that's our job application URL, and the next one is going to be the tags. So we'll kind of just create this out here, but then we'll switch this out a little bit later so we can actually dynamically choose from a list of tags. So I'm going to set these all to tags, but of course that isn't going to be an input. A little bit later on, that is going to be a drop down. So let's copy this down and add in the company name, and let's change this over to company name. Let's just check that out really quickly. I think that looks fine. And next are going to be the highlighted and pinned checkboxes. So let's just create these out from scratch. So we're going to create an input in here, of course, with a type of checkbox. Next to this, we're going to have a label. So let's create that label out in here. And that's going to be for the highlight listing. So let's go and set the name and the ID to highlighted. And the label needs to be for highlighted as well. And let's add a margin on the bottom of 4 to this as well to keep everything nicely spaced out. And this one is going to be whether this is pinned or not. So let's set that up and switch this over to pinned. Okay, let's check that out. That looks okay to me. Now the next section underneath here is going to be to create an account. We'll switch this out later if the user is already signed in, and we'll get rid of it completely, and we'll just assume that the account that they're signed in with is the job that they want to create. So let's create a div out in here with a margin bottom of say 10, just to space this out a little bit from our button. And inside of here, let's grab the H2 that we have up here, pop this inside of here, and we're going to say create an account to manage your listing. Great. So underneath here, we're going to create out a box. Let's set the background to grey 400, padding 6, and rounded large, just to keep this separate so the users know exactly what is happening. Okay, so that's going to be where all of our other inputs go. So we can now pretty much just copy down any of these inputs and pop them in there. So the first one is going to be the email address for the user. So switch that to email, and again, switch all of these over to email as well. And we're also, of course, going to have a name. So let's switch this over to name and change this as well. And then finally, we're going to have a password. So the user can choose a password that they want to use. And of course, you can set up password confirmation if you want to a little bit later. I'm just going to kind of skip this for now. Once we've gone through this and we've actually done this, adding in the password confirmation will be pretty self-explanatory. So let's also change the type over to password here. And that's our section to enter details if we want to create an account before we create the listing or as we create the listing. So that is pretty much it. Let's just add a margin bottom on this section here. So let's create out a wrapper for this entire section here, and we'll pull all of this in, create a div out in here with a margin bottom just to space them two sections out like that. So we've got a little bit of spacing before the create an account section. So that's pretty much our scaffold. Of course, we just want to change the button over here to create listing or whatever you want it to say, but that's pretty much the scaffold of all of our listing details. Just before we go anywhere, let's just hook these up because this stuff's pretty boring. So let's create out our data property within our script and go ahead and again do this within a form. It's going to be a lot easier to submit all of this information through if we have it within a form. So of course we have the job title in here, which by default is going to be an empty string. We have the job location, and let's go ahead and add the job link in there as well. And we have the tags, which is going to be an array. So we're going to have an array of IDs in here that we want to sync up with our tags or with our listings. We have our company name, and again that's going to be an empty string. We have a company logo, which I actually think we forgot to add in there. Yeah, we did. So the company name. So let's add that quickly under company name. So that's just going to be again a URL. So company logo URL, and that's just company logo. So let's go down and add the rest. So we also have whether it's highlighted or not, which by default we're going to have to false. Pinned by default we're going to have to false, and then we have the user information as well, which remember is not always included, but we're going to have the username by default as an empty string. We're going to have the user email and the user password, and we'll only send them down if we actually need to send them. Okay, great. So let's just really quickly hook this up. It's a little bit tedious to have to do this everywhere, but let's set a vModel form job title, and let's copy this down to here for the job location, and for here as well, job link, and for the tags as well. We'll hook this up now, but we're not obviously going to use an input, so we'll have to change that around later. We'll just make sure that that's actually hooking up. So the next is the company name, company logo, and finally the inputs, which will work in exactly the same way. So Vue will recognize that this is a checkbox, so it will set this value to true or false as we add this in. So we just need to say form.pinned, and let's do the user email and the username, and then finally the user password. So let's hook that up as well. Now let's just make sure all of this stuff is actually being hooked up, because the amount of times that I have done this and misspelled one of the properties and not knowing why it's not going through to the back end, I can tell you I've done that a lot of times. So let's just make sure that each of these ones is hooked up. So company logo URL highlighted, you can see that that should have changed to true now. Pinned is also hooked up properly to true. User email, name and password. Let's just make sure they are all hooked up. Great. Okay, so we're pretty much done with our form now. Again, forms are always a little bit boring to put together, but what we now have is the ability to enter all of this information, submit it through to our GraphQL API, which of course we need to figure out how to create the listing, create the user, and attach this at the same time, as well as the things like the tags. How do we sync them tags with the relationship type we've got set up? Well, in the next part, we're going to start with actually outputting the tags. So actually seeing a kind of select box where we can start typing and get suggestions for the tags that we actually have stored in the database. So let's tackle that next, and then our form will pretty much be ready to go and we can start to submit it to create jobs.